Good morning. Hello, everyone. Sorry about the slightly delayed start to everything. And look, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to come along to this session, which is personally a really, really important and proud one for me. This is a report that I write. I'm very, very proud of it. It's very, very much literally off the press, so it's on the available to download it. I haven't actually seen it myself yet, although I've written it, but I haven't seen it beautified and designed. So I hope you like it. I'm really, really interested in any feedback on the report. A lot of work goes into it, a lot of support from the folk at IBTM, so happy reading. Now, what I'm consistently asked to do is come to this event and share with you the findings of the report. And that's quite a lot. The report is very, very big. A lot of research goes into it. And I find myself trying to push myself into an hour of statistics and trends and ideas and concepts into one big session. What I also find myself is talking about what modern meetings and events look like. And none of them are someone like me standing on a stage for an hour trying to push everything into one big session. So I hope you don't mind that this year I've tried to take the decision to spread the load a little bit and to pick out certain concepts that have emerged from the report and to bring them to life for you in a smaller session. So what it requires is a little bit more depth in the session today, but it also requires you to go ahead and read the report, I'm afraid. Sometimes you could watch the presentation and get away with it. The other thing that I do perennially when I write the report is I take all the great ideas and all the great research from really, really smart people and I pretend that they are all mine. And they're not, of course they're not. So what I wanted to do was use these sessions to bring people who have contributed to the findings of this report together and to get them to tell their stories as well. So we're going to try and, it's not something I've done before to try and put everyone in together, but that's what we're going to try and do today. I'm really, really delighted to have some of those people on the stage. There's over 60 sources in the report. I can only give you 4, otherwise we'd be out there and you'd be on here, basically. But I'm really, really delighted today to have some really, really smart people. On the far right, we've got Jason Allen Scott, who is an event entrepreneur, businessman across events businesses, but outside in the real world as well. And Jason's going to bring some of the initial concepts to life around what we focused on in the report, which is about this fragmentation of people and cultural change and cultural diversity. Then we've got the lovely Gabby from Diversity Alliance. And again, Gabby's doing some really, really great things out there in the industry, not just in terms of the D&I work that she's doing, but actually looking to make for a more inclusive industry. And again, some of those themes we want to explore a little bit more. We've got lovely Sydney Nolan from Suanua, but also from Site. And again, Sydney's business has been working a lot and giving me amazing support in bringing some of those incentive statistics to life. Sydney's got some really interesting things to say. And I'm also delighted to have Andrew Perot from the Chorus Agency, who work with some amazing brands. And I'm really, really excited about bringing that brand point of view to life in terms of the report as well. So there's a lot to get through, but what we want to do is just try and bring some of those moments to life if we can. I just want to, if anyone was here last year, I finished the session by asking this question. We talked about in the last report this idea of what is the responsibility of the event organizer in a post-COVID world, in a world that was becoming more inclusive, more hybrid, more connected. What was the job of the event organizer? And we looked at lots of themes, this idea of local to global, this idea of sustainability affecting the way we do things, the growing inclusion of DE&I in what we did, things like big data. And one of the things that we sort of almost finished around was this idea that we had to reassess what the responsibility of the event organizer was. And I want to sort of pose that to you at the beginning of this session, just to think about what is our job, what we're trying to do, and how does that fit into some of the things that we're going to talk about first. So while you ponder that, I just want to bring Jason into the conversation. So Jason, I was wondering whether you could just begin us on a macro level, if that's okay. And let's just talk about some of the things that are out there in the business world at the moment. So first of all, talk to me about the Great Resignation. What does that mean to us?
It's part of a triumvirate, if you will, a pyramid that's currently happening. At the very top, you have the Great Resignation. That follows the Great Termination, and that leaves us to the Great Retirement, also known as the Grey Tsunami or Silver Tsunami. Silver because people like myself are resigning. The baby boomer generation, kids that came after World War II, are now retiring at 10,000 people a day in the US alone. At the exact same time, you've got people who, during the pandemic, realized that it was very easy to put off their quitting, their resignations, until after the pandemic. So we saw this rise of resignations, and all of a sudden it stopped for the pandemic. Why would I quit when I can get furlough? Why would I quit when I can still get paid to stay at home? At the same time, they reevaluated their work-life balance. They started asking themselves questions of how important is the office? How important is the water cooler moments or having an office culture? In the old days when someone quit, and many of you are too young to know this, is we'd used to get a box and we'd put all our stuff in and we'd say goodbye to all our friends and family, and there'd be hugs and crying and tears, and if you were lucky you got a watch and a thank you. I got a pair of socks at my last leaving company, which was about 10 years ago. I'm actually wearing those exact socks today. But today, you're on your laptop, you email, or you even tweet, "I quit," and you throw that laptop out the window, and you open another laptop, and you've got a brand new job, and nothing has changed. So that makes the barrier of resignation so easy, so quick and simple. And the truth is that the media is much like a Tyrannosaurus Rex. It looks for violence and movement. And when we see the market suddenly move violently with resignations, with terminations, we suddenly say something's going on. What's happening here? But when we look at the data, there was actually a rising resignation for the last 7 years that stopped at the pandemic and then completely declined and then completely started again. And the other thing that happened, which is really interesting, is during the pandemic, people asked themselves, is my work that important compared to my life? The Gen Xers, well, they wanted an exciting business. They wanted exciting business space. But the millennials and Gen Zs have realized they'd rather have an exciting life, and work should just support the life, not the other way around. And that was really interesting to see in research.
That's brilliant. I started thinking myself, there's so many questions that are coming out now, and I completely forgot, as ever, to introduce Slido. Slido is available on this session. So please do use it. Start loading up your questions if you have them. We'll return to them at the end of it. Jason, sorry. But I started thinking, oh, I've got a question for you. Right, so what we're talking about is we're talking about essentially people changing jobs. But we're also talking about people dispersing. We're talking about this idea of the office suddenly not being the normal office a bit. Can you riff a little bit about what that looks like? Maybe talk about some of the companies that you're either involved in or aware of around that, please.
So up to March 2020, 1 in 27 jobs on LinkedIn, which is our reference, said that they offered a remote work component as part of the process. Now it's 1 in 7 jobs. In fact, across the entire globe, 50% of all work has a hybrid component. So that has been massive, coming into companies and talking about what does that look like? What does it look like when there's no creative hub? What does it look like when there's no innovation hub? How do communities speak to one another? And I think what has to be made obvious to people who don't realize it is the idea of working in a city, at a factory or at an office is actually something incredibly new. It's an idiom that isn't even 100 years old. Previous to that, we lived in villages. We lived in farms. We lived in small communities that would sometimes cause us to go out to bigger communities to sell our goods and services. And then we'd come back. But this idea that we've moved to in the last 100 years is proximity to power is power. So if you're in finance, you want to be in New York or London. If you're in creative, you want to be in Switzerland, Sweden, or California. If you're in tech, you want to be in Silicon Valley or Cardiff, Wales. So that has completely changed. And because of the pandemic, what we realized was you don't need to be close to any particular place. That allowing us to have the great dispersion, people moving out, is that your talent pool suddenly becomes absolutely ginormous. And you can still control productivity. You just can't control presenteeism.
Fantastic. So just to close, thank you, Jason. So how does that look when we start going into the event a little bit more. So a few of the themes that we've taken over the last sort of couple of years that I want to remind you of, but some establishing ones as well. This idea of spoke and hub conventions. So instead of just having a big convention, having lots of small satellite conventions, perhaps around a major convention, linked together hybrid-wise, either on a domestic level or in an international level, but this idea that, like the office, the event is fragmenting, and that's what Spoke and Hub's all around. We also had this idea in the report called what maybe clumsily we've called meeting inversion, but essentially, as Jason sort of says, what is the role of the event when we're talking about this fragmentation? One of them is the idea that essentially an event used to be a place to get away from the office. Now it's a place to recreate it. So there's a number of things culturally that are changing, which means that event needs to change the way it acts in front of a slightly different workforce. Remember, in many times, the event is bringing together people that maybe haven't met. It's different from what it used to be, where you're bringing together people that met loads and loads of times before. There's also this idea that we look at, that around that is, again, recreate that water cooler moment, recreate the drinks after work, the creativity, the ability to turn around and say to the person next to you, what are you working on at the moment? Can we get involved and collaborate? There's also a big thing at the moment in terms of democratizing content and looking at barriers to attendance. And again, it goes back to that question that I asked at the beginning. What is the event organizer's primary responsibility? And how does hybrid actually allow them to maybe answer some of those questions? How can we allow people that perhaps can't attend meetings to get hold of content that perhaps they would never have been able to been hold of before if it wasn't for streaming services and as such? So again, there's a huge amount that the event is now able to fill the gaps that business is now, that the changing business landscape is posing. Sydney, I wanted to bring you in on that basis as well. I can't thank Site enough for the amount of information they give me on a daily basis, but actually Site were amazing because what they did is they completely spiked pretty much this whole concept and just nailed it basically, which is, and I'll let you do this, Sydney, by asking you a simple question. Why do people have business events now? In all the things, all the reasons why we shouldn't be having business events now, why are they having business events now?
I feel like that's a question that could take days to answer. Why are we having business events? I mean, that's a seminar in and of itself. But I will say just quickly to Alistair, thank you so much for the respect you've given Site. I think the respect is very much returned. We are huge fans of massive white papers, so we are glad that you feel the same as we do. But I think, why are we having business events? Yeah, I think what we're really seeing is the pandemic grayed a lot, and I think we're seeing that trend continue. Jason, you just touched on some of what it grayed, but we're really seeing some of that continue into business events as well, where it's no longer just about having your standalone incentive trip, or you're no longer just having your association meeting, or you're no longer just having your kind of corporate sales kickoff, but you're really combining those. I know Site has really heard from a lot of its members this idea that people are now looking for sales kickoffs with incentive-like elements. So that might be, okay, we have 3 days in a meeting where we sit in a ballroom and we talk through our new product lines, our new strategies, whatever it might be. But then it's also about building culture and rewarding and remembering kind of who our workforce is and making those connections and really kind of shaping the ways we want to work together. I think we just heard about how we were facing these great fragmentation challenges. We're facing these great generational differences. When we think about kind of what we want our cultures to look like, events are really the spaces we have now to shape and to make those decisions in a nutshell. So again, wide topic. We can go as deep or as shallow as you want there. But I think, to cut right to the punchline, we're having events to build culture. And I think it doesn't matter if it's a meeting, if it's an incentive, if it's a trade show. You're seeing them all blend together, and you're seeing them become just as gray as the workforce is in some ways. Not age-wise, but in terms of kind of where we're putting those boundaries and where we're drawing those lines. I think we're really seeing that go out the window a little bit. Maybe not too quickly, but I think we're really starting to see that accelerate a bit.
And maybe taking your Site hat off now, putting your newer one as well. I mean, one of the things, again, we've had discussions about is that constantly growing part of that brief that turns around and says, look, forget all this other stuff. This is about a fragmented world being brought together, and we need to establish culture. And I was wondering, maybe delve into a little bit more about that, but also kind of, I guess, how you can change the dynamics of the event to allow you to do so as well?
Sure. So I think, I guess the incentive space is maybe where I can speak to this best, but Site actually did some really interesting research earlier this year where we interviewed about 40 different C-suite leaders and put it all together in a report called Leadership Insights. But what really emerged from that report and from the other projects we've been part of, things like the Incentive Travel Index, the ITI that we do with FICP, and our friends at the Incentive Research Foundation, is this idea that incentives really are kind of that cultural building space, and that it's really more about the soft power and the soft power kind of projects that incentives can build over sort of that hard power or that hard return on dollars. I think we're kind of seeing this idea of when itineraries get more personal and when you really kind of put that networking time front and center with executives and participants, you get that chance to really kind of talk about what your values are as a company. You get your chance to kind of talk about and build that culture together. I think as we're sort of seeing a workforce that is mixing generations, is mixing backgrounds, is mixing life experiences, I think just creating that space where you can come together and you can share those experiences in a meaningful way, in a way that is personalized, in a way that is tailored to your employees, to your company, to you as a leader, is all the more important.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Sydney. And again, I just really want to hit that point that it's actually, in all reverence to what the guys at IBTM doing, there's this idea that if I can use my event to create culture, that is where I see the biggest amount of value in everything that we do as a community and as an industry. This idea that culture builds value for businesses. I think it's a really, really important point. I remember also another trend that that you'll find within the report, an agency that I worked with, and one of the things that she said to me was, I said, "What's the big trends?" This is a while back. And she said, basically, it can be covered by the word "go big or go home." And I think, again, as we look at our value, this increased trajectory of understanding of what we do as an industry and the value that business and organizations have put on it, we see that value is continuing to go up. And the more we should go big and go home. It's funny, when recessions hit and times of trouble hit as well, it's not the small, poor events that go. Sorry, it is the small events that go. It's the big ones that stay. So actually this idea of event convergence is quite a big one as well, which is, why don't I mix my meeting with my incentive? Why don't I mix my conference with my training? Why don't I put that together with incentive departments as well? This has been happening for quite a long time, but it's continuing to gel together, and Site are seeing that, and actually a big part of that voice that says the more we do so, the more value that we can add on to it as well. So thank you, Sydney. Gabby, I wanted to bring you in now as well, because obviously there's this idea that events create culture, but also within the events, brands need to have a good culture, and they need to have good values as well. So can you give us a bit of an entry point by maybe talking a little about yourself and your own journey, and talk about where you approach this from, and then we'll go into a bit of detail. But I think the more they know about you, the better.
Oh, okay, cool. So my name is Gabby, and I'm founder of Diversity Alliance. So I don't like to say former events professional. I still consider myself an events professional. It's just I don't necessarily produce or deliver events anymore, but I'm still very much in the event space. And this is why I feel like I have a particular connection and drive, if you will, to really ensure that what we're doing within our organizations and the events that we produce are inclusive, accessible, have diverse content, diverse people as part of the decision-making process, and also attending and learning and experiencing everything in the same way. And really that's kind of why I ended up doing what I was doing, to, I guess, educate and upskill on how we can do that as businesses and brands and event producers.
Thank you. And do you think you're a sign that business is now starting to look at events in a slightly different way? The fact that your organization exists and is flourishing is a sign that actually people are getting on to some of these ideas of culture. I'd be interested in the sort of questions you're being asked in terms of trying to bring that to life for events, but also event professionals in general.
Do you know, there's two things that I guess I'm seeing. One was I'm going to refer to back in summer, I think it was 2020. The years are just, I don't even know what year we're in now, to be fair, what next year is. But so I think summer 2020, when there's a real kind of heightened awareness on racial inequality, which really kind of drove the conversation around diversity and inclusion a lot more. And thankfully, we're starting to consider all diversity, intersectionality, and all of that sort of thing. And what was my point? What was your question now?
Yeah, the sort of questions you're
Oh,
being
that was
asked.
it.
It's
Thank you.
it's diversity, absolutely.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then
And so there was this fear at the beginning where brands were approaching, and all agencies were actually approaching us because they were kind of being asked, well, what's your diversity and inclusion policy? How are you going to make this event sustainable? How is this event going to be accessible and inclusive? And people didn't know, they didn't have the answers. So we had that side of, oh my God, we're being asked by brands how we're going to do this, and we don't know how we're going to advise them. And then I had on the other end of the spectrum, workforces realizing that actually it doesn't work us trying to advise if our culture and our values aren't really kind of set in stone, and if we don't understand what our own values are. So we want to get that internal piece right before we start advising our clients and our brands. So a lot of work has been going on around creating inclusive cultures, leaders, how they can be inclusive leaders, how there's strength in kind of vulnerability and empathy, which creates and builds trust within organizations and amongst teams and employees, which, to your point, Jason, I feel with regards to the Great Resignation, I think part of that would be if a company is not matching kind of your values, and I think we have our own ethics and values and core beliefs now, then we're going to move on to a company where they do match our values. And organizations are recognizing that. So they're working on that internal piece, getting those values and core beliefs and ethics right, and then they're able to then pass that kind of learning, understanding, best practice to better advise their clients, etc.
that's great. Can you talk to me? You've touched on this as well, but maybe you can dive in a little bit more. The value of values. How do you articulate that in terms of in front of your clients? Because you obviously have these great discussions about how do you turn around and say, what is the bottom line on this? Not just financial, but why is it so important that you should be adopting brand values? Why are some of the best and biggest brands in the world getting this right? What's the value to it? How do you try and articulate that?
Oh, that's...
How long do you
He's
want?
got the tough
No,
ones today,
that's
right?
a really tough question. Let's start small. I think it's about working out, first of all, as I'm kind of going to repeat myself a little bit here, what your organization and organizational values are. And I think that comes from, I guess, crowdsourcing that from those that are within your team. To help you come up with those values. And what I think previously happened was we were really stuck with, we've got company missions and we've got company values and this is what they are, and we're not going to kind of be flexible and look at perhaps changing those with what's happening with society and what our consumers and our audiences and our attendees kind of want. So this is a really hard question now.
Yeah, no worries. I wonder if you could just take us into the event a little bit more as well. Actually, no. One of the things that we've been talking about is obviously, I knew you through Diversity Alliance, but I've been looking quite a lot more about what you've been putting out into the world about things like celebrating men and things like that. I was wondering whether you could talk about the journey you're on around that sort of stuff, why you're picking up on some of those areas.
I think because there's just been so much of a misconception that, and kind of almost gives DE&I a bit of a bad name, that it's all about kind of underrepresented or marginalised people, but it's actually not. It's about how all of us experience the world, how all of us have different challenges that we have and that we kind of need to resolve for ourselves, and that we are a lot more connected than we realise. And I wanted to highlight that by kind of focusing on different groups that we sometimes are ignored, as you said, kind of like men in the workplace, particularly when it comes to kind of DEI initiatives, strategies, all of that sort of thing. Sometimes their voices aren't heard, but we don't think about the intersectionality of that because we still might have, a man who's part of the LGBTQ community or has accessibility needs or is neurodivergent. They should still be part of the conversations. And I think the point is we need to start not looking at DE&I as like this is just for the poor people who've kind of been a bit done down, and it's about how this is going to benefit all of us, and then therefore it's going to benefit society, and also hopefully we're going to be able to have that impact to create behavioural change as well in society in the same way that movies and music and whatever has. I think the events industry can definitely do that. But I think it's about understanding and supporting each other, and that will come down to values, and then that will create a better culture.
That's great. Gabby, thank you so much. And again, just to plug the report, there's specialist sections on D&I that Gabby's been invaluable in construction, in constructing. We're touching on sustainability on Thursday's session. We're going to do something different on Thursday, but we're going to touch a bit more on sustainability. But again, there's some latest research on how that conversation is playing out, how it's changing and evolving. Within the confines that we've started with, we're talking with Jason and Sydney about as well. And of course, we haven't let go of wellness either. That continues to be a continuing trend as well. I want to bring Andrew in now, because one of the things that I'm specifically passionate about is the idea that we need to keep on remembering that business and brands drive our industry. And within the IBTM Trends Report, we do look at different sectors of industry and try and sort of understand how their success leads to our success and how their dynamics adapt and change our own. But I wanted to bring Andrew in first. Just, would you mind actually just doing a bit of a chorus? Just introduce us to chorus, some of the brands you work with, some of the brands you work with and the sort of work you do before we go into the main thing, because I think it's important they understand about what you do.
Sure. Morning, everyone. My name's Andrew Perrott. I'm the MD of Chorus Agency. We're based in London. We work globally. We work with many FMCG luxury brands, to name a handful, Montblanc, Bulgari, Johnny Walker, others. We also work in corporate event world as well. But I think one of the reasons why you invited me here today, Al, is I think you're being very transparent without it being a deliberate intention. I think much of our business has moved to experiential and third space activation, and that wasn't a business plan. It's been very organic, but it's been very noticeable. You take the pandemic blip out of the sort of the recent chronology of things. It's quite noticeable, and as do a number of our peers, friends of ours that run successful agencies. It seems to be a demonstrable trend, and in the light of the theme of this talk of creating and building events for culture, I think we see that in the briefs that we receive from brands. It's very much about giving them a chance to voice whatever their position is. Obviously, everybody's rightly terrified of greenwashing or being insincere or perhaps having an opinion or a position on a public topic that won't stand for scrutiny. And if you take, from an agency perspective, 10 years ago, where a brief may have been to launch product X in a particular location, now it's often what we call a blank page brief, and we will be sitting at the table with the above-the-line agency or the digital agency, HR often as well, and there'll be a conversation around, we know we want to make a statement, have a position, and have a campaign in the next calendar year, but we're not quite sure what it is, and we tend to be part of that conversation from the outset. And again, coming back to the context of this topic, we see, or the clients are telling us, that the experiential event is their sort of authentic voice. So whilst we might have a finite number of guests attending any particular event, it's about the content, and the content we create at those activations becomes their voice piece for a much larger campaign. So that's the brief synopsis from a brand brief perspective.
Thanks so much, Andrew. And I wouldn't mind if you could just bring one to life. We've actually one behind us, an event that you did with Talisker. Could you give us, first of all, the context of the product, then take me through the brief, and then how, again, like you've very articulately done in terms of the culture, talk through to how you created this experience here.
Yes, so this was a brief for Talisker Whiskey. They're a brand owned by Diageo, who are a client we do a lot of work with. And whilst this wasn't particularly large in scale in terms of attending audience, it's hopefully a helpful, tangible example on a topic like this that can become a little too hypothetical sometimes. So Talisker, it's a product it's a whiskey that's made in Scotland. The location where the product is made is on the shoreline, on the seaside. It's very much the provenance and the location and the environment and the raw materials create much of what they believe makes their product special and successful. And they have a commercial arrangement with Parley who are an environmental organization looking to protect the world's oceans. And the reason or the purpose for this launch is it was a very exclusive limited edition release of product. So it wasn't necessarily about trying to promote and sell as many units on a commercial basis. It was very much about them putting their voice forward of what matters to them as a brand, and they came across very authentically and sincerely by this parlay relationship. They took some of the staves that they make this liquid in, they put them in the kelp forest off South Africa. If you've seen My Octopus the Teacher, a similar part of the world to where that was shot, and they stayed there for a long time to absorb the environment. So they're not pretending that they are entirely an altruistic brand or this is an altruistic product, but they are trying to demonstrate that the environment is true to their end result. And then the relationship with Parlay gave them a platform to really talk honestly and emotionally about what matters to them as a brand. And the brief to us was, how do we try and create an immersive environment that takes the people that attend genuinely into that world? And we tried to take you to the sea kelp forest. As you can see, some of those shots up there, it was a very immersive experience. This was a ticketed event which sold out, and all the proceeds went to the charitable arm. So we still try and keep the experiential consumer takeaway at heart, but the message, the sort of the longer message behind it, is the purpose that this brand was trying to communicate. And that's just one example of many that have a common thread. It's not just about trying to promote a product. There is a subtext, there's a message, there's a position, perhaps a social position that they want to communicate through their products. As we all know, the consumer behavior now it's a two-way street, and if you don't believe in the brands and the products you're buying, you'll very quickly move on. And the reason this is hopefully a helpful example is it's very authentic. It's not greenwashing. It's not written by a marketing department. It's very much a CSR strategic initiative.
That's great. Thanks, Andrew. I was going to ask Andrew to talk about another fantastic piece of work that the guys did for Tudor. We're a bit short of time. I hope you don't mind, Andrew, but I do. If you've got time to, or if you want to ask a question that says, Andrew, tell me about the Tudor activation, that would be really, really cool. And I'd certainly encourage you to talk to Chorus Agencies. I just wanted to move a little bit on because I'd like to give you guys a bit of time for questions as well, if that's okay, guys. I guess what I wanted to do to add to Andrew's point here is just get this idea of the way business is being done for the first time as part of the trends session in the Trends Report. Sorry, as part of the trends section of the Trends Report, we've put this chapter in there, which is just about ethical business, about businesses trying to behave in an ethical way, and how far that seeps into the DNA of the business, and how that's become, as Andrew's articulated, part of the event's brief. And that's manifested in many different ways. The picture behind you here is actually an activation that Nike did after the Glasgow Commonwealth Games. They basically built a basketball court in a slightly underdeveloped part of Birmingham. So the idea is they left this random acts of kindness, this activation that would just allow inner city kids to get into basketball. You'll notice it's barely branded Nike. It wasn't just about a branding exercise. It wasn't a marketing. Again, like Andrew said, it was about leaving something positive behind for a local community. And that's what activations are starting to look like. And one of the last two themes I'll pick out before we go to Q&As is this idea that brands are quickly becoming super citizens of the world. They want to be more trusted, well, they are more trusted than media and politicians put together in most research that you'll see. They're taking this very, very seriously. So are businesses, and we as an event organizing community need to take some of those ethics and sow them into the grassroots of what we do. And again, one of the last things I'll leave you on is this phrase here. It's not what you say to people, it's what you do for people. Brands are understanding it's not just about projecting onto the world what they have to say. They want to do things for their audience as well, like this, like the Talisker example and Tudor as well. And part of that is creating amazing worlds for them. Part of that is delivering value through experience. And I think that's one of the key things that have come out of all these trends is what that looks like on the other side as we start to create the business events that we do. So I just wanted to sort of end by just thinking about that question that we posed at the beginning, is what is the responsibility of an event? And for me, it remains, it's to find its audience, wherever that audience may be, whoever that audience is, culturally, societally, movement-wise, and things like that. No matter where they are, how do we go and find them? It's not about, events aren't just for people that like coming to events. Events are to go out and reach people with fantastic content that has value. And if you look at everything that these guys have been saying, it's all about this idea that an event can bridge that gap to go out through all the new toys we have to play with in terms of hybrid, through all the outreach programs, the road shows and things like that. We're able more than ever to go out and reach events and to brands that has value as well. So thank you very much for paying attention. I hope you like my new format, by the way. Less of me, more of experts, eh? How about that? I would like you to maybe give a good round of applause to our panel before we go to questions. So thank you. And we have Slido, hopefully, is about to flick on magically behind me for any questions. We could always do the whole put your hand up thing as well. That's always worked in the past as well. I'm not averse to that. We have mics and things like that.
All the technology in the world, and we've gone back to put your hands up.
I think we've probably answered every question during the last 45 minutes. I think you're absolutely right.
Can I ask a question to one of our panelists?
Yes, why don't you? Go on, Sydney.
So, Gabby, I have a question for you, because obviously I wear a couple hats here, one of them being Sites hat. And I think the struggle I guess twofold question for you. One of the struggles I think we have as an association is to figure out where associations need to lead in the business world space, in the business event space, kind of where we lead in terms of taking a leader role on establishing values, on establishing DEI best practices. I guess I'm curious where you see the role and the value of associations specifically in the MICE space. And then I'm also kind of to build on that too, how do we do that in a way that's not performative and that's authentic and not just us peacocking to our members?
Well, I'm assuming this is happening already. I'm seeing a lot of this happening already with regards to associations where they're trying to get the lay of the land and actually find out what their members are thinking and feeling when it comes to those important things such as inclusion, accessibility, and then also trying to, I guess, find out how they can create more diverse memberships as well. Because as we always say, with regards to decision making, we need representation, and this is where the struggle is. There's not a lot of a pool to choose from right now. So we are seeing associations thinking about different initiatives that can be set up to start kind of supporting more diversity within associations, on boards, in leaderships, helping to make decisions that can then shape, I guess, the work that associations are there to do, really. But it's a slow journey at the moment. It is a slow journey, and it is challenging. It is a challenging one because we feel there's not enough diversity in the room to help when we always say we need to hear from diverse voices. So it's reaching out to who is already within your membership and really asking, seeing what they want, and doing what you do so well when providing those education and tools and resources, but making sure that I guess the education, the resources, you are kind of getting that also from external people that don't necessarily need to be within our industry. They're doing it well already within their industry. Start nabbing those ideas and bring them into your own associations, kind of what's happening. But yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone's being performative. I don't know if I'm just being nice, but the way that I'm seeing going on, it is being done quite quietly and underground. I'd like to see a lot more sharing, more openly what everyone's doing, so we can support each other with best practice. But I think we're making progress.
That's great.
Love that.
Thanks, Gabby. Well, look, all I'll end by saying is that there is another section on Thursday. It's going to cover a completely different level of content, but I would encourage you guys to come to that session if you want. If this is your main course, dessert will be served on Thursday, basically. And download the report. And like I said, I'm really interested with any feedback you've got. But thanks so much for coming to the session. I hope you have an amazing IBTM.